You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Where is Daredevil?
I'm right here. Don't miss the return of Marvel Television's Daredevil Born Again.
So what's next?
I feel liberated.
We're gonna take this city back.
Over medicated.
In an all-new season, now streaming only on Disney+.
They're hunting us. It's time we started hunting them.
I can work with that.
This should be tons of fun.
Marvel Television's Daredevil Born Again, now streaming only on Disney+.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 524 of our Civil War podcast. I'm Rich, and Tracy won't be with us for this show. She's been brutally busy with work lately and had to work yesterday. And so in order to give her some semblance of time off this weekend, the boss here at Civil War Podcast headquarters decided to relieve her of co-host duties today, which I think was a wise decision. Anyway, as you guys will recall, with the last show, we started to look at the Federals' attack on the Dead Angle, that salient in the Confederate line on Cheatham Hill. We said that two Union brigades from Jefferson C. Davis's 14th Corps Division were making the assault, the brigades commanded by Dan McCook Jr. and John Mitchell. And with the last show, we looked at the attack made by McCook's brigade. And so, as promised, with this show, we'll look at Mitchell's attack on the Dead Angle on June 27, 1864. In June 1864, at the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain, Colonel John Grant Mitchell was just 25 years old. Born in Ohio, Mitchell graduated from Kenyon College 2 years before the firing on Fort Sumter and then practiced law. He served as a captain in the 3rd Ohio before becoming colonel of the 113th Ohio in the summer of 1862. Mitchell led a brigade in George Thomas's heroic defense of Snodgrass Hill at Chickamauga, but he saw no action in the fighting at Chattanooga. Like McCook's brigade, Mitchell's command had seen much campaigning, but comparatively little combat so far in the Atlanta campaign. Like McCook's men, Mitchell's troops were awakened early on the morning of the 27th and told to leave behind everything except their haversacks, canteens, and 60 rounds of ammunition per man. So they piled up their knapsacks as officers detailed sick men to guard them. Then the brigade moved forward to the staging area for the attack and formed columns of regiments. The 113th Ohio stood first in the column, followed by the 121st and 98th Ohio, with the 78th Illinois bringing up the rear. And Mitchell deployed the 34th Illinois out front as skirmishers. Now, last time we talked about the risks of attacking in column rather than line. And here, Mitchell, like McCook, tried to mitigate those risks. He instructed Colonel Henry Banning to move his 121st Ohio, placed second in the brigade column, off to the right as soon as the 113th Ohio, in the lead, reached the enemy works. Mitchell also wanted the regiments behind Banning's to conduct a similar maneuver, and so extend the brigade formation in a continuous line to the right. In other words, Mitchell planned for the brigade to approach the enemy works in column, then deploy into a line of battle after reaching them. To facilitate this tricky move, Mitchell aligned his regiments in column but slightly in echelon, with each following regiment's rightmost companies extended farther to the right than the regiments directly in front, thus, theoretically, making it easier to deploy into line at the proper time. Now, Mitchell's Federals were poised to strike the portion of the Confederate line held by Manny's brigade of Cheatham's division. Manny's rebels held the earthworks from the tip of the dead angle and then along the south side of the salient. And Ben Cheatham exhorted his men, quote, to hold the works at all hazards. Because of how quickly the summer morning started to heat up, soldiers in the 1st Tennessee, at the tip of the salient, stretched their blankets across the top of the trench to provide shade, but they quickly took them down as soon as the Union artillery opened a furious bombardment at 8 a.m. And Mitchell's Federals began their advance as soon as the guns opened up. William Robinson remembered how the men of the 34th Illinois, deployed out front as skirmishers, sprang forward, quote, yelling like so many Comanches. Well, the men of the 34th quickly overran the Confederate skirmish line as the rest of the brigade, advancing swiftly at the double quick, moved down into the valley of the stream that separated the opposing forces. As it did with McCook's brigade, the terrain here, the stream and the trees and bushes that bordered it, slightly disrupted the formation of the 113th Ohio at the head of Mitchell's column, but the regiment pressed forward. Men in Hooker's 20th Corps, just to the south, could see Mitchell's troops moving quickly toward the enemy works, and one of the spectators, William Clark of the 123rd New York, said, "It was a grand sight to see them charge." Well, within the Confederate works at the tip of the dead angle, Captain W.D. Kelly of the 1st Tennessee rose up and peered down the slope. He caught sight of Mitchell's Federals as they approached and yelled, "Up, up, men! They are charging us!" Well, even as the Confederates steeled themselves to carry out Cheatham's orders and hold the salient at all hazards, F.M. McAdams of the 113th Ohio reported the Federals' charge was slowed by the abatis the rebels had placed in front of their lines, especially numerous saplings the Confederates had cut, quote, and cross-slapped in a manner that made it impossible to keep in line. Well, besides the disrupting effects of the abatis, rebel musket fire from the front and cannon fire from an 8-gun Confederate artillery position to the south exacted a heavy toll on the advancing Federals. Those 8 guns were the ones we mentioned Cheatham had placed so as to enfilade any Federal troops assaulting the dead angle. Captain Toland Jones of the 113th Ohio recalled how the Confederate musket and cannon fire intensified when his men reached a point about halfway up the slope of Cheatham Hill. The men of the 34th Illinois, deployed out front as skirmishers, halted about 12 or 15 yards from the Confederate entrenchments and waited for the rest of the brigade to catch up. The 113th Ohio came up a few minutes later, and F.M. McAdams said many of the men, quote, crowded up to the works, only to be shot down. A few climbed upon their works and were made prisoners. Most of the Ohioans, though, found shelter wherever they could, on the uneven ground or behind stumps in front of the rebel works, and there opened fire. The 113th's commander, Lieutenant Colonel Darius Warner, was hit and badly wounded in the right arm while urging his men forward. In fact, 10 out of 19 officers in the regiment were either killed or wounded. Behind them, when the 113th drew near the rebel works, Colonel Banning moved his 121st Ohio by the right flank to carry out Mitchell's instructions and clear the 113th to the front. The 121st completed the maneuver and closed up on the Confederate entrenchments, but suffered appalling losses while doing so. Inside the Confederate works at the Dead Angle, 37-year-old Brigadier General George Manny hadn't exactly packed troops into the vulnerable salient on Cheatham Hill. Born in Franklin, Tennessee, and a graduate of the University of Nashville, Manny served as a lieutenant in the 1st Tennessee Volunteers during the Mexican-American War. When his 3-month term of enlistment expired, he enlisted in the United States Army and served as a lieutenant in the 3rd U.S. Dragoons during the March to Mexico City. After the war, Manny returned home to Tennessee. He studied law, passed his bar exam in 1850, and established a law practice in Franklin. It became quite successful, and he subsequently entered politics and was elected to the Tennessee State House. Following the secession of Tennessee in 1861, Manny joined a Nashville militia unit, then served as a captain in the 11th Tennessee. After being promoted to colonel of the 1st Tennessee, he served in Western Virginia, first under Robert E. Lee at the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain, and later under Stonewall Jackson at Bath and Romney. Then George Manny asked for a reassignment to his native Tennessee, which was threatened by federal forces. As an officer in the Army of Tennessee, he participated in the Battle of Shiloh, where his performance earned him a promotion to brigadier general. He led his brigade of Tennesseans in the battles of Perryville, Stones River, and Chickamauga. In November 1863, he was wounded severely in the arm at Chattanooga, but returned to duty for the Atlanta campaign. So, needless to say, Manny had a great deal of battlefield experience, and he apparently felt comfortable with posting only about 180 men of the consolidated 1st and 27th Tennessee at the tip of the Dead Angle. But when Mitchell's brigade of Federals came knocking on the door, one member of the 1st Tennessee recalled that, quote, "We'd had the word passed to us to hold the works at all hazards, but it did look as if we would be pushed back by sheer force." However, Manny's troops then mounted one of the most inspired defensive actions of the war at the Dead Angle. Colonel Hume Field, commander of the consolidated 1st and 27th Tennessee, encouraged his men by yelling, "Give them the bayonet if they come over." And as his men loaded and fired as fast as they could, Field joined in. He, quote, "sat astride of a stringer that supported a headlog while his men below passed loaded guns up to him." But then a Yankee soldier managed to get close enough to confront the colonel, and at such close range that their musket barrels overlapped. Well, the Federal shot first, and the bullet grazed Field's scalp. The combative colonel fell off his perch, unconscious, and landed amongst his men in the trench. He regained consciousness a few moments later, but found that his left side was temporarily paralyzed. According to Sam Watkins, Fields said, "Well, they have got me at last, but I have killed 15 of them, so turnabout is fair play, I reckon." However, Fields was very fortunate that the bullet only grazed his skull, and he ended up regaining full use of his muscles. Meanwhile, his men fought on. Sam Watkins said that every defender of the dead angle felt, quote, "The whole responsibility of the Confederate government was rested upon his shoulders." Watkins said he and his comrades, quote, "had to keep up the firing and shooting them down in self-defense. It was verily a life and death grapple, and the least flicker on our part would have been sure death to us all. We could not be reinforced on account of our position, and we had to stand up to the rack, fodder or no fodder." So, I could guess the meaning of stand up to the rack, fodder or no fodder, but I Googled it out of curiosity, and what came up said the phrase is an old American idiom that means to remain steadfast in one's duties, commitments, or position, regardless of whether there is an immediate reward or favorable outcome. A rack refers to a feeding rack or manger used for livestock, so horses or cattle that stand up to the rack are prepared to eat. The phrase suggests a duty-bound commitment to stay in the fight or do the work, even when conditions are awful. So there you go, folks. Feel free to use that quaint American idiom to buck up office morale the next time you're at work and are hearing some negativity. Just say, "Well, I guess we just have to stand up to the rack, fodder or no fodder." Well, in any case, back to Sam Watkins, who said he fired 120 rounds that day, and he reported that the barrel of his musket became, quote, "so hot that frequently the powder would flash before I could ram home the ball, and I had frequently to exchange my gun for that of a dead comrade." During the frenzied combat at the tip of the angle, Watkins' life was saved by his close friend, William Hughes. It happened when 3 Federals approached the parapet. Watkins fired and managed to knock down 2 of them with 1 round. The 3rd man had Watkins at a disadvantage, but Hughes reached up and grabbed the muzzle of the Yankee's gun, quote, receiving the whole contents in his hand and arm, mortally wounding him. As he was carried away, quote, all mutilated and bleeding, Hughes told his stretcher bearers to make certain his possessions were given to Watkins. Well, for Watkins and all the other Confederates still standing at the dead angle, the fight continued for what seemed like ages. Sam Watkins recalled, "The sun beaming down on our heads and a solid line of blazing fire from the muzzles of the Yankee guns being poured right into our very faces, the hot blood of our dead and wounded spurting on us, the blinding smoke and stifling atmosphere filling our eyes and mouths, and above all, the roar of battle, made it perfect pandemonium. Afterward, I heard a soldier express himself by saying that he thought hell had broken loose in Georgia, sure enough."
Did archaeologists discover Noah's Ark?
Is the rapture coming as soon as the Euphrates River dries up?
Does the Bible condemn abortion?
Don't you wish you had a trustworthy academic resource to help make sense of all of this?
Well, I'm Dan Beecher, and he's award-winning Bible scholar and TikTok sensation Dr. Dan McClellan, and we want to invite you to the Data Over Dogma podcast,
where our mission is to increase public access to the academic study of the Bible and religion, and also to combat the spread of misinformation about the same.
But, in a fun way.
Every week we tackle fascinating topics. We go back to source materials in their original languages.
And we interview top scholars in the field.
So whether you're a devout believer,
or you're just interested in a clear-eyed, deeply informed look at one of the most influential books of all time,
we think you're going to love the Data Over Dogma podcast.
Wherever you subscribe to awesome shows.
The pressure the Federals were exerting on the defenders of the dead angle was tremendous, so the adjutant of the 1st Tennessee, with his own regiment nearly out of ammunition, ran to the left to get help from the consolidated 6th and 9th Tennessee. Since there were as yet few Yankees attacking their portion of the line, those men immediately started off, moving by the right flank through the trench. The embattled members of the 1st and 27th Tennessee saw help was on its way, but they felt insulted, according to Sam Watkins. They assumed it was because someone thought they were crumbling under the pressure of the enemy attack. Some of them shouted, "Go back! Go back! We can hold this place!" But the reinforcements from the 6th and 9th Tennessee took position and added the weight of their fire to that of the 1st and 27th. With the heavy amount of fire issuing from the Confederate defenders at the tip of the salient, Mitchell's Federals couldn't simply remain for very long in their exposed position just outside the rebel earthworks. They either had to cross the parapet or fall back. Colonel Banning's 121st Ohio suffered enormously because of that 8-gun Confederate battery to the south. And the other regiments behind him in the brigade column, the 98th Ohio and 78th Illinois, failed to extend their line and close up on the rebel works as planned. But no one could really offer any criticism of those two regiments for their failure, since it was simply asking too much of them in the face of the intense enemy fire and in the midst of the chaos of battle. And so only the 113th and 121st Ohio, and the men of the 34th Illinois, who'd been out front as skirmishers, actually closed up on the Confederate entrenchments. After the Federals of McCook's brigade, to the left, fell back to the meager but welcome shelter of the rise of ground to their rear, the 121st Ohio withdrew about 20 yards to take advantage of the dead ground also. And then the 113th Ohio did too. The rest of Mitchell's brigades soon followed their example and took cover behind that rise of ground. For his part, Ben Cheatham was aware of the danger at the angle, and he'd ordered reinforcements to help Manny. Brigadier General Jesse Finley's brigade rushed forward for a mile at the double quick, but arrived on the scene just after the Federals fell back. According to Sergeant Washington Ives of the 4th Florida, the brigade had been issued brand new Enfield rifles the night before the battle, and, quote, "The boys were disappointed in not getting to shoot." The fight at the dead angle lasted anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour, according to participants, but the actual time surely must have been closer to 20 minutes, given the exposed condition of the attacking Federals once their assault stalled. A member of the 34th Illinois noted the battleground itself was quite small, estimating Mitchell's brigade probably covered no more than 1,000 square feet of Georgia soil at the height of its attack on the rebel works. At any rate, Mitchell's men, like McCook's, dug in just behind that rise of ground, using bayonets and tin cups to scoop the Georgia soil into something like a low parapet. The rebels could see them digging 40 to 100 yards away, and they recognized that because of the error in the placement of their line on Cheatham Hill, that rise of ground offered the enemy scant but essential cover. As a result, Ben Cheatham felt his forces were too weak to sally forth and attack the Federals and push them back from that close position, but he also felt certain the men of his division could continue holding their works indefinitely. As we mentioned previously, James Morgan's brigade, the 3rd Brigade in Jefferson C. Davis's division, remained behind in support during McCook's and Mitchell's attacks on June 27th. And Morgan never received orders to advance, even with McCook's and Mitchell's troops hanging on to their lodgment just a few hundred yards away, perilously close to the enemy. For his part, Army of the Cumberland commander George Thomas had arranged for ample reserves to be available to Jefferson C. Davis if the need arose. Brigadier General Absalom Baird's 14th Corps Division, which replaced Davis's division when Davis moved out to assemble for the assault, was ready to go in. Baird's Federals listened to the noise of battle and watched as wounded men from Davis's command made their way toward the rear, but Baird was never called upon to advance to Davis's aid. And just to the south, 20th Corps Commander Joe Hooker stood ready to move up Alpheus Williams' division if he was called upon to divert Confederate attention from the attack on Cheatham Hill. John Geary, closer to the scene, also readied his division for action, going so far as to push troops forward to capture the Confederate skirmish line. Hooker's corps artillery kept up a near constant fire during and long after the attack on Cheatham Hill, as many of the Federal soldiers in 20th Corps wondered if they would be ordered to join the assault on the Confederate works. That order, however, was never given. J.T. Bowden of the 12th Tennessee believed it was possible that no more than 1,000 rebel soldiers were in action at any one time, holding the sector of Cheatham's line that was hit by McCook's and Mitchell's brigades on June 27th. McCook and Mitchell brought about 4,000 veteran troops to the fight, so if Bowden's estimate is accurate, the Confederate defense of the Dead Angle is a sterling testament not only to the pluck of Ben Cheatham's Tennesseans, but also to the value of earthworks in compensating for scarce manpower. But that didn't mean the Confederate victory at the Dead Angle was easy. Sam Watkins wrote, "When the Yankees fell back and the firing ceased, I never saw so many broken down and exhausted men in my life. I was sick as a horse and wet with sweat and blood as I could be, and many of our men were vomiting with excessive fatigue, overexhaustion, and sunstroke. Our tongues were parched and cracked for water, and our faces blackened with powder and smoke, and our dead and wounded were piled indiscriminately in the trenches. There was not a single man in the company who was not wounded or had holes shot through his hat or clothing." But the Tennesseans had managed to hold their ground during the bloody fight for the Dead Angle, even if it ended with the Yankees glaring at them from behind that rise of ground just a few yards away, where Cheatham's line should have been placed from the start. The Federals of McCook's and Mitchell's brigades engaged in the closest, most intense combat of the day and came nearer to making a significant penetration of the rebel line than the 15th or 4th Corps soldiers had. And yet, that statement only carries weight as a form of comparison, since the 14th Corps attack never broke into Cheatham's position. making the attack with columns here worked no better for Davis than it had for Newton, and the use of multiple lines of battle by Morgan Smith and Walcott in the 15th Corps was no solution either. So when all was said and done, holding good ground and fighting a defensive battle from behind earthworks provided the key to Confederate success at the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain. That means it's time for this week's book recommendation, and our recommendation this time is Tennessee's Forgotten Warriors, Cheatham and His Confederate Division by Christopher Lawson. You can find a list of all of our book recommendations if you head over to the podcast website, which is www.civilwarpodcast.org. Also at the website, you can find info on joining the Strawfoot Brigade and supporting the podcast in that way, just like Taffy123, Max, and Carlton M. have done recently. A big thank you to them, and thanks to all of you for listening to this episode of the podcast. With the next show, we'll wrap up our discussion of the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain. Tracy and I do hope that you join us for that, but until then, take care. Thanks, everyone. Bye.